Hello, thanks for joining me on Susie Makes. Today's craft video is all about how to do cross stitch. Now previously I've shown you how to find the center of your fabric on this channel and how to separate stranded cottons. There is an art if you want to separate them without getting them tangled. So I folded my fabric in half twice to find the center of the fabric, and that's where I'm going to start my cross stitch. If you do this and you've cut your fabric according to the size given in the pattern, you're guaranteed to have enough fabric to complete your picture properly. If you start anywhere else, there is a chance you might sort of get over this far and find you haven't got quite enough fabric. So I've already threaded up my cross stitch needle. A cross stitch needle usually has a long eye compared to other needles, sewing needles, and is blunt because we don't want it fraying and splitting our fabric or our threads. Now, with most cross stitch patterns, you'd start in the center. So I'll take this top left hand corner one here of a snowflake, and we'll be stitching that today. Probably won't do the whole thing, but you'll certainly know what you're doing by the time we're finished. So in order to find the center of this design, which hasn't actually got it marked on here, that shows you, doesn't it? I'll show you on one of these. Here's a cross stitch design with arrows either side here and top and bottom here. Now where these arrows meet, that is the center of your design, and that is where you will be starting your cross stitch. I haven't actually got those arrows on this smaller design, so we're going to take it that the center of this snowflake, don't know, can you see that? Center of this snowflake is where we're going to start. So that one stitch in the center of that snowflake is going to be the very first stitch I put on my blank fabric here. Now I'm using 11 count Ada fabric, so it's as clear as possible on screen. So we find the point where the fabric crossed in the middle, which was there, and I'm going to place my first stitch. Now, you never knot your cottons in cross stitch because it will leave unsightly lumps and bumps all over the back, and especially if you're going to frame it or put it in a card, then those lumps and bumps will possibly make it sit a bit more forward than it should, and you'll be able to see the sort of little mounds of the lumps and bumps. So I'll show you how to start off. So you start in the bottom, well, I always start in the bottom left hand corner. You can start in the bottom right hand corner or even either of the top holes. You see each stitch is going to cover 4 holes on your fabric. So I start bottom left. Now, no matter which way you decide to start, whether you decide to start bottom left or bottom right or whatever, then that bottom stitch has to lie, the bottom and top stitches have to lie in exactly the same direction for every single stitch you do therein. And the reason for that is because if you're sort of doing this stitch where I'm starting bottom left, and then I'm doing the next stitch where I'm starting bottom right, then it's going to look quite messy to the eye at the end of the picture. So try and remember all your stitches, whatever way you're comfortable, whichever direction you're comfortable with stitching in, bottom left, bottom right, starting at the top of the square, top right, top left, it's up to you, but make sure you stick with that for the whole of that picture. So I've come out in the bottom of the square that I'm going to stitch in bottom left. Now I'm going to go diagonally and go top right. You see that? Let's just make sure. Now you put your hand, all the time I've left this little tail on the back and I'm holding it with my finger. See? So you pull your needle through, holding on to the tail end on the back. And you see you have one diagonal line. Now I'm coming through bottom right to complete the stitch. And while I'm coming through the bottom right, I'm going to take the little tail on the back through the centre of my thread, and as I pull the didn't stay there. There it is. As I pull the thread through to the front, it's going to catch that tail. And you do that for about 4 stitches and it will catch the tail and make it lie flat against the fabric. Okay? Now, to finish the stitch, I'm going to show you a little technique. Actually, no, if you're very new to cross stitch, maybe I'll leave that till later. So to finish the stitch, you now put your needle through top left. So we've gone bottom left to top right, and we're going bottom right to top left. Take your needle through, and there you have completed a cross. Now, on the pattern, let me lift that up to show you. That is the only stitch sitting there all by itself. There isn't another stitch next to it or above it or below it. So the next nearest stitch I'm going to work on, I'm going to go diagonally. Now immediately diagonal to the stitch we've just made is a white space, so there isn't a stitch there. See that? But next to that there are 3 more red stitches, so that is where we're going to go next. So diagonal to the cross I've just done, the stitch I've just done, there isn't a stitch, it's blank. But next door to that, that is where I want my next stitch to begin. Now don't forget we are capturing the tail on the back for about 4 stitches. So I've gone bottom left, I'm going top right. Now I'm coming out bottom right. Pull through, and if it isn't naturally grabbing the tail on the back, then you can maneuver it. Hold the tail so that as you're pulling your stitch through, it has grabbed the back. So bottom right and then back top left. You see? That was my first stitch. Now diagonal, immediately diagonal to that stitch, diagonal top right, there isn't a stitch, so that stays blank. But next door to that there is a stitch, and that's the one I've just completed. Going back to the pattern, there are actually 3 red stitches side by side, so I need to complete 2 more next to each other. So we come up bottom left, so we're coming up into through a hole that's already been used to make this stitch. That's fine, that's how they all sit next to each other. And we go back top right, You see we've made the first diagonal for the next stitch. Now and then you have to let your thread unravel, otherwise it gets twisted and will look unsightly. So you do that by holding your fabric up and letting your needle and thread drop, and it will unravel. Right, now I'm coming out bottom right to complete the third stitch and going in top left. There. Now we have 2 stitches side by side. I need to do one more, so we're coming out bottom left. Just making sure we're catching our tail on the way through. Going in top right. Coming out bottom right. Going in top left. I see. We have those 3 cross stitches sitting side by side, and the little one in the centre where we began. So now we need to go back to our pattern and have a look. Point with my scissors here. Now we've just completed 1, 2, 3. Now on the next row you've got 1, 2, 3, but number 1 starts not immediately above the one you've just done, but 1 over. So that is what we're going to do next. So copying the grid as it is. What we're doing with our stitches is copying the grid as it is laid out on your pattern. So we come out bottom left, go in top right, coming out bottom right, going in top left. There you go. That's the first stitch. Now I need to do 2 more side by side. Coming out bottom left, going in top right. Coming out bottom right, going in top left. And you see I've done 2 now, and the last one. Coming out bottom left, I've caught that down quite a bit now, so I'm just going to trim that little tail that's left back slightly. And you see how that lays nice and flat on the back now. So I've come out bottom left, going in top right, coming out bottom right, going in top left. And there you have your next 3 stitches of the snowflake. So looking back at our pattern, so we've done, I'll try and make sure this stays in focus. We've done the bottom 3 and we've done the 3 sitting on the top, but that line is 1 over compared to the bottom one. So we've done that. There's also another stitch on this line on this side of the snowflake. But we have a white space in between where we have just finished and the next stitch. So as there's only 1 space there, I'm going to go across and complete that stitch. So we don't want this next stitch sitting right next to where I've just completed a stitch. We need to miss a square. You notice this fabric is all made up of squares, and each time you work a cross stitch you are working over 4 holes. Now, as I said, I always have my stitches going in the same direction that I first started, and I tend to always work bottom left to top right. However, sometimes, so as you're not wasting thread or stretching it across too big a gap, it's okay to do the opposite of that, in as much as instead of bottom left I would start top right and then go in at bottom left. It's still going in the same direction, as in a diagonal that's to the right, but I'm doing it from the top rather than the bottom of that direction. So this time I've gone in top right and I'm going in bottom left. See, previously I've done bottom left going in top right, so I've still got the diagonal sitting in the same direction, but it means I haven't had to stretch the thread or waste any of it on the back. As us crafters know, all our equipment is precious. And to finish off, I'm going in the normal bottom right to top left. So there, you can see I've just done that stitch next to that white gap. Now, I'm only going to complete this section of the pattern. Now, if I was doing the whole pattern, as there is only one square separating each snowflake in each corner, I would go across and actually complete that section as well, because there's not vast white spaces to drag my thread across. And sometimes, especially if you're using a darker thread, it is possible to actually see that darker thread through the holes in the fabric, so it would look a bit unsightly. So if you're stretching across just 1 or 2 gaps, fine. If it's more, then I would say, and you're using a darker thread, then I would say finish that section off, rethread and start a new section, the section next to it. It's entirely up to you how you go about where you go from A to B to C to D in order to finish your pattern, but I've always been mindful of the thread that I'm using up, and also not wanting unsightly thread stranded across the back of my work to show through on the front of my work. So our next line of the snowflake is the next stitch sits on top of the one I've just done, and there's actually another one beside it, and then there's another white space, so there's no stitch needed there, and there are 3 more red stitches all sitting side by side. I'm going to do that now. So where the stitch I've just done, now I came in, I finished off the stitch I just did by going in top left, so I can't now come out top left to do the next square because it just undoes what I've just done. So put that back. So I'm going to have to go in top right to get the stitch sitting in the same direction. Go in bottom left and come out bottom right, go in top left. Now if you remember, there were 2 stitches sat there exactly side by side, so now I'm coming out at bottom left, in at top right, out at bottom right, in at top left. Now there was another gap, so we miss a stitch, and there were 3 red ones sitting together like before. So bottom left, in at top right, bottom right to top left, bottom left, and do give your thread a little bit of a pull, just a slight pull, so that it's sitting nice and snug against the fabric and you haven't got any unsightly loose sections on your pattern appearing. Now I can feel my thread twisting, so I'm just going to unravel. Your stitches sit much neater if you don't let your thread twist up too much. So there's the next section. We started with 2 crosses, missed a gap, and then missed a stitch, and then did 3 more, which is just as it says on the pattern. 2 red stitches, miss a stitch, 3 red stitches. Now to start the next row, which is just 3 red stitches, there's nothing on the 3 red stitches where I have just worked. There's nothing above it, it's just white space, so you don't stitch anything there. So the 3 red stitches that are on the next row start immediately above the space of the row we've just worked. So and I'm going to start top right. So there's the space of the row we've just worked. So the next 3 stitches on the next row start immediately above that space. Now, because of where my needle was positioned when I finished the previous row, I'm coming out top right, going in bottom left, coming out bottom right, going in top left, bottom left to top right. So you can see occasionally, if you're like me and you're starting bottom left to top right when you first start cross stitching, and then bottom right to top left to finish off a stitch, that depending on where your needle is sitting and what you've done previously, you might have to go top right to bottom left instead of bottom left to top right, but your stitch will still sit in the same direction. So there, I've done those 3 stitches now. And the next on the pattern, 2 red stitches. So immediately above where I've just finished the row below, there isn't a stitch. So we start immediately above the middle stitch on the row below and do 2 stitches. So bottom left to top right, bottom right to top left, and once more on this row. And the very last is 1 stitch on top of the end of the row before. So I just finished the previous stitch where I would normally start a cross stitch, so I've gone top right to bottom left. Still sits in the same diagonal, as you can see. And there. I have completed just cover that up a bit. So I've completed this top section of the snowflake. Okay. Now I would then do this section, then this section, then this section. But as I said, where there is only one gap separating the snowflakes in this section, it's actually quite alright to go straight across and finish each section. Excuse me, bit of a tickly cough. So there we have it. You have this Aida fabric. There are all sorts of fabrics for cross stitching. This is one very, very popular one. This is 11 count Aida. The most common one I think people stitch on is 14 count Aida. And what all those numbers means is how many holes per inch of that Aida square. So this being 11 count Aida, it means there are fewer holes per inch. The more holes per inch, then the finer the fabric is and the more detail will come out in your work. But I chose 11 so that it actually shows up the best on camera out of all of them. Now, I've shown you how to start off with catching your fabric on the back underneath your stitches as you go. Now we want to finish off, so we turn our work to the wrong side, and you see you've got all these lovely stitches on the back. You run your needle underneath about 4 or 5 of them, like so. Pull through and snip, and that won't be coming undone. Okay. Now, Aida fabric these days, it never used to, so I'm not actually quite sure why it does now. But it's very, very stiff, really stiff. It's almost like stitching on paper, which is actually perfectly feasible as well. There is such a thing as perforated cross-stitch paper as well. Now, it used to be much softer than this, and a lot of people will swear that the only way to cross-stitch is to use a hoop, so that it helps with your tension, and you might feel a bit better about using a hoop. Personally, I've never ever got on with them, so I have never cross-stitched a picture using a hoop. And I know there's a lot of us out there who don't use hoops, and Jane Greenough, being one of the most famous names in cross-stitch, never uses a hoop either, and she cross-stitches on the finest linen. So, as I said, there are many different types of cross-stitch fabric out there. Aida is just one of them. There's and they're all known as even weave fabrics as well. Because if they weren't even weave, then you wouldn't actually get a cross, because a cross is nice and straight, made up of 4 corners, isn't it? Now, the even weave fabrics, you know, when you're working a cross stitch, you cross stitch over 4 holes to make like a square, so each corner of the cross stitch has either gone into or come out of one of those 4 holes to make a cross. With even weave, you actually go over 2 strands. So you have like a little hole in the center of your cross stitch. So you go from top left to top right, but there'll be a little hole in the center. And you go from bottom right to top left, and then you've got so it's done mostly, I'll just show you that, with an even weave fabric. So normally you would go bottom left to top right on Ada fabric to complete the square. On even weave, you sort of miss a hole and go top right, and then you come bottom right to top left. Okay, so obviously that's made the cross a lot bigger, but you see you have got a hole in between each corner of your cross stitch. Don't know if you can see that, but I'll try and point to see. With my needle I can point out there's a hole there, and the same there, all the way around. So that's what even weave is. It goes over 2 threads instead of 1 to make the same cross, but it doesn't come out as big as that because it's much finer fabric. It still comes out nice and dainty looking, so don't worry about that. If you want to try even weave fabrics, it's fine, it comes out beautifully. And those like myself who have some sight problems still find it easier to work on Ada. I don't find it easy to work on even weave with my eyes, and I'm just trying to get used to the hang of using a magnifying glass on my work, so that I can keep stitching in even weave fabric as well. So that in a nutshell is how you get started on cross stitching your picture. How you start off your thread, how you do your crosses, and how you finish off your thread. So I hope you've enjoyed this. In the notes in the description underneath this video, there is a link to 3 beautiful cross stitch heart pictures courtesy of my lovely daughter Karen Creftor, and there's a link to those heart patterns, and they are free. And they are all done in cross stitch, but using different patterns. Intrigued? Click on the link and go and have a look. Those patterns are free for you to use and to make as many as you'd like if you want to sell it, but please don't sell on the pattern, that is protected under copyright. So fill your boots, enjoy yourself. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please consider subscribing so you don't miss future ones. Bye for now.